Welcome to Downen Scale Replicas and this build of the Shadow Class Stealth Battlestar, or simply Stealth Star. In the mid-1980s, Lockheed built an experimental stealth ship for the U.S. Navy to examine the application of stealth technology on future naval vessels. So this was known as the Sea Shadow, and it became public about 10 years later, and Revell even issued a 1/144 scale model of the ship. I thought it was just about the coolest thing around at that time, and that fascination combined with inspiration from some fan designs that I've seen led me to design an interpretation of a stealth Battlestar that would be consistent with the Battlestar Galactica TV series from the early 2000s. This kit, in the more or less BSG standard scale of 1/40/105th scale, combines stealthy shapes with a lot of engraved details suitable for panel line washes. I even challenged myself to design and print in-scale Vipers and shuttlecraft for the kit, and I'm pretty happy with the results overall, and we're going to look more at those later. So let's go ahead and dig into the kit. The parts count is not high for this kit unless you count each railgun and Viper separately. Top and bottom holes, engine details, and the display base make up the major parts. There's a decal sheet that comes with the kit, and it provides runway markings for the landing bays and of course for the ship name and for the colonial crest on top of the ship. Assembly is relatively straightforward, and the exploded parts view included with the kit should provide the modeler everything they need to know about building the kit. Now, I like to study technical specs and drawings, so included with the kit is a data sheet with callouts for key features and technologies that are designed into the Shadow and its in-universe incarnation. And I hope that you'll enjoy digging into the design as much as I really enjoyed putting together the spec as well as the design itself. On to the build! On the lower hull part, you will notice evidence of supports from the 3D printing process, and there's just no way to get around them being there. However, these can be easily cleaned up with a sanding stick, as I'm showing here. This is probably about a 320 grit. I would recommend that you don't go any larger grit than 320, and in fact 400 grit will probably clean up most everything that needs to be cleaned up. They're really easy to clean up on this resin. Now, on the upper hull part, you're going to notice a slight raised rim around the edge, and this helps to ensure a clean, straight edge gets printed during the 3D printing process. I'm going to suggest that you sand this off using wet dry sandpaper on a flat surface as I'm showing here. The water is going to help control the resin sanding dust, which can be pretty nasty stuff. And I tell you, just a few swipes or swirls around a piece of sandpaper like I have here is going to take care of all of those edges. It's just a very slight edge. It's less than 1 millimeter in height and less than 1 millimeter in width. It's not going to take much to clean it up. So go easy on it and check often regarding your process. Now, once the whole parts are cleaned up, go ahead and paint the upper and lower landing bay parts now. I use light gray on both parts, and on the lower part there, or on the landing bay floor, you're also going to notice a fine engraved area that denotes the sides of the runway. I'm going to freeze the frame here for just a moment so you can really see these in the highlight of the light there. Those are both sides of the runway, and you can use this as a guide for you in masking those parts that should be left unpainted, because you're going to want to be able to glue those parts to the upper bay part as well too, without paint being there on the surface. Landing bay decals are next. I really love decaling because this is where a model really starts to come alive here. I've gloss coated the floor of the landing bay, and I'm applying micro scales, micro set decal setting solution to prepare the surface for decals. It's just a very weak acid. It's going to just lightly etch the surface of the model itself, and then once the decal goes on top of it, it's going to help soften that decal a little bit. Just helps the decal settle into the details better and prevent silvering of that decal on the surface. Now, as you've seen, I've already briefly dipped the decals in warm tap water, and I've let them set on my cloth for just about a minute there until the glue loosens up a little bit and the decal can be slid off that backing paper. And I'm just using a wet finger and some tweezers to slide that off. And once I get the decal off the backing paper, I'm going to use a paintbrush to just help position the decal. I'll dip that brush in water, and it's just a gentle way to move the decal around without hopefully ripping or tearing the decal. Now, not shown here though is I'm going to use a cotton cloth once I get the decal just perfectly positioned to blot the decal, blot some of that water away, and really get it to begin to settle down onto that surface. And here's the final result. Now on my prototype that you're seeing here, I had to cut the runway decal in the center to get it to properly fit. I did not have it sized correctly. But this did lead me to redesign the decal, and now the kit decals include just a single runway decal each for the port and starboard sides, which will perfectly fit the kit. Next, time to assemble the top and the bottom hulls. There are locating stubs on the lower hull to help with getting the parts properly aligned, so the upper hull is going to kind of click right around those locating stubs. And I'm not showing it here, but put some super glue around the rim of those parts and snap them together around those locating stubs, and really that's all there is to it. And don't forget the engine details on the aft end of the ship as well too. You can see I'm just putting a little bit of super glue back here, and then the horizontal detail will slot into this area, and then there are upper and lower details on there as well too. So be sure to test fit them first. They may require a little bit of cleanup of the support stubs that I showed to you earlier. And you'll see that I'm trying to put this one on upside down. So pay attention to what you're doing. I figured it out before I got it set on there, and it couldn't come back off, but pay attention to which direction you're putting on there, how they fit onto the kit, because there is, particularly on this piece right there, there is a direction that it's going to fit better than the other direction. On to painting, and I'm using Hitaka's Gunship Gray, which comes from their orange line. Now, these are lacquer paints. Painting is really my favorite part of any build, and here I'm going to first lay down a marbling coat of little squigglies and lines over the light gray primer that I've got put down on the model. And what I'm trying to do overall is I'm trying to create a paint finish that will not be a monotone gray, but instead something that's patchy, that has highlights and dark tones, and it's just going to make the final paint job a little bit more interesting than an overall monotone gray paint job would be. Once I'm satisfied with the marbling coat, I come back with a 50-50 mix of paint and thinner to start creating the final tone of the paint. So these are really thin, not quite transparent coats of paint that begin to bring the overall paint job up to the desired dark gray finish. But they don't cover up the marbling that's already been done, so that patchy, interesting look will still remain. Finally, I finish off with a couple of very thin paint applications to just tune up the final gray tone of the paint. This is almost all thinner that's going on now, but it's just enough that I can bring that tone up in certain areas where I believe that I still need to. It's really more stark here under these harsh lights than it appears in reality. It's a more subtle effect if you see it in person. Now I'm going to use Hitaka's gray on the railguns. I want them to be a slightly lighter gray to create some additional interest on the completed model, so they stand out a bit from just the basic hull of the model itself. And don't forget, we still have engine nozzles, so I will be painting them with Vallejo's metallic steel as well. And done! I've gloss coated the hull, and I will use Tamiya's panel line accent color to help pull out the engraved panel line details. Now this light gray paint is an enamel, so it's okay to use over the acrylic gloss coat that I've put down over the model. And I just touch each panel line, and the enamel paint flows along the panel line, filling the panel line. It's hard to see here, I know, because of the lighting. But I'm going to let this dry for about 10 minutes. And then I'll come back over it with a cotton swab or a Q-tip to remove enamel paint that I don't want on the surface of the model itself. And that's going to leave only the light gray paint in the panel lines themselves. Now that I've done that, I adjusted the light a little bit, and you can see now the light gray panel lines and how they really pop against that dark gray hull. And now on to the decals. And like I said before, this is my other favorite stage of modeling here. And just like I did with those landing bay runway decals, I briefly dip each decal into the warm water, and then I'm just going to let them sit on my cloth for about a minute, long enough to start putting the micro set onto the fuselage. And like I said before, I really do like this micro scale product line here. So I'll start out with the micro set, and using an old paintbrush, I'm just going to brush some of this onto the surface of the model to help prepare that surface for the decal. Now I've got some fine tweezers here that I use with the decals. I'm going to wet my finger so I can pull that decal off of the backing paper. And I'm just going to position it as best as I can and then begin to slide that off the backing paper there using the tweezers. I'm just going to go back and use that paintbrush again. Sometimes I'll use the back end of the paintbrush if I really need to move it around a bit. I do prefer to use the brush itself moistened with a little bit of water so it doesn't tear the decals. Once I've got that positioned, I blot it with a cotton rag, kind of with a rolling motion there to roll the water out from underneath the decal. The white decals are fairly opaque, so they do stand out well against a dark gray background, such as I have here, and that's exactly what I wanted. I put micro sol on top of all of the decals once they've been positioned, and this will soften the decal film and let the decal settle down onto the model surface. And it should help with preventing any silvering, which decals are really prone to do on dark backgrounds such as I have here. With the decals done, one thing that I do want to point out is that the modeler has a choice of closing the recessed railgun bays using the covers included in the kit, or they can choose to have the bays open and the railguns deployed. Each gun should fit into the corresponding mounting hole in the bay, and there's going to be 8 total on the top and another 8 on the bottom, and that is a lot of firepower. I had mentioned that I challenged myself to design and print in-scale Vipers and shuttlecraft for the kit. I've painted the Vipers while still on their support rods. The rods themselves are white. The Vipers, I did a little bit of light gray on them. And now I will actually clip these at the base of the white support rods, which then fit into the launch bay tubes designed into the sides of the ships. And this gives them the appearance of launching from the tubes, with the white support rod being the engine thrust exhaust that we really saw prominently in the original late 70s TV show. Now, you may decide that this just isn't for you and you'll just walk away from it, but personally, I kind of like the way that this looks with the Vipers coming out of the bays. And one last thing, if you know me, then you know that I like to mount my models on attractive display bases. Here I've painted the base that's going to be included with the kit. There's a brass rod also included which fits into the base and into a corresponding mounting hole in the bottom of the kit. And that's a wrap. I like the way it looks next to my same scale Mobius Galactica when it sits on the shelf, and it was a lot of fun to bring this to reality. I hope that you enjoyed following along in this video, and I appreciate the time that you took to watch the video. Please visit the website downscaledreplicas.com to see more photos of the kit, and if you have an interest, to also purchase the kit as well. I would appreciate that. Thanks for joining me, and happy modeling.